these days. Yeah. Hey, you're a rock star.
Forgot his name, but he was in the summer workshop.
You should keep giving stuff. I had a break this week ago. I'm not sure it's a storm. And I was like, maybe Angus gonna have to give me stuff. I'm like, this might go to these good time.
Yeah. Last year, it's like going back to
A lot more confidence in the
Hi, how are you? Good.
front and center. Yeah, the obligation to stay awake. You're front and center. You sit in the front, you can't fall asleep. You sit in the back, it's alright. In the front.
So last year, this contest started. I was just photographer going around taking pictures. Susan had the idea to all the most students at the school to send them a band and take pictures. All teams.
Cool.
Oh, wow.
It's obvious that should be
Yeah. They were with me last year.
That is a reverse. That is performance. That is
No, this is your rehearsal. It's okay.
It's what?
This is your rehearsal. It's
This is my rehearsal,
close
right?
space. It's not like,
Well,
it's not like higher.
that's true. Yeah.
I'm not more worried about you than sitting there and ready to sit.
Front center. Do not stand over the game.
Earl!
Hey, how are you? It's so well. Nice to see you.
Good to see you. Yeah, excited.
I have no idea what I'm going to say because I've never given this talk before, but
Okay. That's okay. You know, I do that the next 3 days a week.
yeah, no, I don't know what the course is. I'm just used to giving like talks. I'm used to like giving the same like a variation of the same note over and over again. This is like all new material. I have no idea.
Inspiring.
We'll
So,
see.
are we recording this?
Yes.
Excellent.
Yeah, excellent. Great.
It's pictures of the mayor in your classroom.
Oh, yes. So, I just submitted it the week my first programming contest. It went really well, but it took literally 2 evenings to emails because everybody and their brother wanted to join it.
Yes.
Right.
Hour of Code and Mayor.
What?
The Hour of Code and Mayor are 2 hot topics.
Well, some people figure out the president.
Yeah.
But
Did he code or did he do a talk?
I showed them our whole program. So we had robotics, projects,
Very cool.
It was great. They got my robotics team to my classroom until 7 last night. Today's the competition for that as well.
We're having a few problems on the east side, so we gotta solve it.
It's all too much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's a tech company out there.
don't know if I just press send.
Yeah, you use the wrong product. They're not Google enabled. Because they're not able to get the.
How far away are they?
I don't know. Recorded.
Yeah, I guess some of the.
What do you think? Get going anyway? We should start anyway?
We give them a person call and just say, hey, we're going to start.
Because they're connected.
Yeah.
Maybe they still know how to project.
Or it's there. No. No.
Modern technology.
No words?
Start anyway?
We might have to go and then they can jump in when they jump in.
I want to let the audience know that we may need to connect sometime. Pause to connect.
Oh, we needed to pause that.
Just when you're saying that we may need to pause. I'm sure, like, if they do connect, we might have to see something. B5?
Pardon? He wants 5 more minutes. Maybe I'll just start with
Why don't you start the intro and then we'll stall and
Yeah.
ask questions. Yeah.
Okay, everybody, good morning. Let's see if we can get started. Thanks for coming. Welcome to the 2014 Winter Programming Contest. And we want to say hello to everybody in Redmond also, who will, if not right now, be watching this on a simulcast. So my name is Jason. I'm on the faculty here at UW, and I have the pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker today. Our speaker is UW Professor Kate Starbird. She's returning again this year. How many of you were here last year for the contest? Good. So you'll hear some new information.
Totally different talk.
Totally different talk. She's an assistant professor in the Department of Human-Centered Design and Engineering, and that's in the College of Engineering. So I know all of you are studying computer science, but how many of you are also athletes? Good. You'll be especially interested in what Professor Starbird has to say today. You may also have heard of the field related to computer science called data science. That's all about deriving knowledge and understanding from data, usually lots of data. It's also called big data. And after today's contest, we have another challenge for you related to data science. It's called the Paul Allen Computing Challenge, and you'll get some handouts when you go back to your desk about that. This is the second year of that challenge. It's called Data Science in Action this year, and it's all about sports data, which you'll hear more about from Professor Starbird. First, let me tell you a little bit about her background. So how many of you are on Facebook? Not right now, maybe, but in general. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, anything, LinkedIn, anybody, anything I've forgotten? Snapchat. Okay. So obviously you're all familiar with social media systems. Dr. Starbird studies the use of social media in her research during crisis events. She looks at how the crowd, that is the online users, can contribute to crisis response events, and she talked a little bit about that last year. This is a great application of computer science and data science in solving real-world problems. Professor Starbird graduated from Stanford University in 1997 with her BS in computer science, and she earned her PhD in 2012 from the Atlas Institute at the University of Colorado in Boulder. So being computer scientists, I'm sure most of you are pretty good in math. You may have noticed that there was kind of a big gap in the years there between when Kate graduated from Stanford and when she got her PhD. So that's more than it usually, it was 15 years? Something like that, more than it usually takes people to earn a PhD, even though that's a long haul. She wasn't just slacking off, though. In addition to being a researcher, Kate was also an athlete in both high school and in college. She played basketball as an undergrad at Stanford, where she was a star guard for the Cardinal. She set a career scoring record there and was inducted into the Stanford Athletic Hall of Fame. Then she played professional basketball for 9 years, including in the WNBA and right here in Seattle for the Storm, and also internationally with great success. So you can see she was a little busy during that gap, but she returned to school, got a PhD, and she's now on a new career path, probably one that's a little easier on her knees than running up and down the court every night. Professor Starbird is a stellar example of someone who was a student athlete, now a gifted scholar, researcher, and teacher. She shows that you can be a great computer scientist, have a real impact on the world with your work, and still have a normal life outside of computer science, which is always important. It's a great honor to be her colleague in HCD and introduce her here to you this morning. Thanks for being with us, Professor Starbird. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Andy. I think I might be a little too tall for this mic. If you can't hear me, start waving at me and I'll start speaking up. If you can't. You can't? No, okay. I appreciate that intro. I normally don't combine the two parts of my life very much, and I've moved on to different research paths and different things from my athletic career. But today is actually the first time I get to talk about one of my new research interests, which actually does kind of intersect with my past. And it's also the first time I'm giving this set of slides, and so you're going to have to stick with me. It might not be my most fluid performance. It's going to be all new material, and I hope it's going to be fun for you all to see, and hopefully you'll get excited about data science and maybe about the programming challenge that we're trying to launch. So, like Andy, I'm in this in a department called Human-Centered Design and Engineering, and it's a big name, and it's hard to explain often, but it's somewhat new at UW as well. It's somewhat new in terms of academics in general, but I think what we do is really interesting. And what we do is we look at the intersection of people and technology, and we really focus on how people use technology and also understand how technology affects our lives. And so we have at the center of everything we do, it's a human-centered perspective. And we combine that with design and engineering because we want to build things for people. And so we go back between trying to create things and then go back and understanding. Before we build something, we want to understand how people want to use it, what people's goals are, how this technology might affect them, maybe unintended consequences of the technologies that we're developing. So we really have this holistic view of technology that really seeks to understand what people do with technology and how they use it. And for me, this is a great opportunity also to combine a couple of my interests. I had computer science as an undergraduate. I started programming when I was way too young to be programming. Now that I think back on it, I was a little bit nerdy, but I am proud of that. So I get to use my computer science background, and I also get to look at social science questions. So learn about people and people's interactions and cultures and different things. So I really enjoy putting those things together. And today, I'm going to put them together in new ways. So we're going to talk about big data, sports analytics, and something that one student and I are starting to call athlete-centered design. And a lot of this relates to this, this movement called the quantified self movement. Has anyone heard of the quantified self movement? Couple little hands. Anybody want to say what quantified self might be? Yeah. Yeah, defining person. So it has to do with statistics about people, and there's a lot going on in quantified self. But we have a bunch of new devices and new technologies that allow us to measure things in interesting ways. And so the quantified self movement is about using this technology to measure our activities in different ways. Is there anyone here? So we have this. Yeah, we have like sort of heart rate monitors, wristbands that are doing interesting things. We've got sensors, chips in our shoes that can measure how far we're walking and where we're going. GPS devices on us. We have all these new devices that can measure things in new ways. And so there's these very interesting questions surrounding this. But I have this question I ask my undergraduates every year. Do you consider yourself a quantifier? Does anyone here quantify some of their activities in some way? Does anybody here consider themselves not a quantifier? I don't do any quantification of myself. Andy, because I had a lot of people answer me this question. So a few of you said no, and a few of you said you do quantify. Very few of you said you don't quantify. I would say anyone who's ever gone on a run with a watch has quantified themselves in some ways, because you've been seeing how long you went for a run. Anyone who's counted. If you go to the weight room, so I'm thinking this in an athlete perspective. If you go to the weight room and count how many repetitions you did on a certain set, that's a quantification. People that have counted calories in the past, that's a way of quantifying things. So in fact, we've always quantified a few things, but now we're able to quantify a lot of different things. And so the next question is why would we do this? And what's it good for, and what might it be bad for? And one of the things that is a really interesting application of quantification is this idea of technology for health and wellness. So we can measure things in new ways, and we might be able to apply that to health questions or fitness questions or questions about making ourselves healthier. So I'm going to show you a couple different kinds of quantification that are happening. So one is manual tracking, and manual tracking has gone on for a long time. We now have some tools that help us do it. You know, our phones are always available. We can write things down. But manual tracking for things like diet, nutrition, calories, physical activity, sleep. There are a lot of new applications where people can sort of chart these things in an effort to help them understand their behaviors and maybe make different choices in the future. The next kind of round of things is the battle of the bands. We've got all these new wristbands. Does anybody here have a Fitbit or a band of some sort? Does anybody here have a parent with a Fitbit or a band of some sort? See, yeah, there we're getting at it. Because you all probably get enough exercise in your lives. Maybe you don't, but I hope you do. But a lot of people in my generation are using these bands in one way or another. And these bands just measure the steps that you've taken. They also, a lot of them measure sleep in interesting ways, so they can give you feedback about your activity and your sleep levels. Another really cool one that I was talking to a professional, but an elite runner, and I was like, "What do you use?" And he said, "I don't use really any quantification except for these watches that have a GPS tracker to kind of show them where they go during one of their runs, and so they really like it, so they can keep track of their mileage, and they can keep track of like the best trails that they use and things like that." I actually have a video, but because we're doing some remote stuff, I'm not sure I want to try that. But can anyone tell me what this might be? It's right here. Central Park. It's Central Park, and how is it? Where did it come from? In the back. Yeah, so this is actually, they took, I think it's from a Nike Plus GPS device of all the runners in Central Park for a certain period of time, and they tracked where they went, and these were sort of the patterns. Actually, it was all the runners in New York City. And so the more people were there, the lines get thicker, and it's a heat map, so they turn red if there's more activity there, and it's lighter blue when there's less activity. But you can see over time the patterns of all these people using. So it's actually an image of where people run in New York City, and it was made through the Nike Plus data. Another application is sleep. So people are able to use these bands for sleep. They're also doing other kinds of sleep measurement. And we're getting a lot of new possibilities of feedback from sleep, which is really interesting because as an athlete, I always knew sleep was very important. I also, as a young person, had a lot of trouble sleeping because I got nervous about that sleep. And it turns out there's some really interesting things here with giving people feedback about their sleep, because it can help you sleep more to know, you can help, well, I know I did better this week on my test and I was sleeping better, or vice versa. But it turns out that there's some negative consequences for giving people feedback about their sleep. And it turns out if someone gives you, if you think that you didn't sleep well, you're going to perform worse, even if you might have slept the same. So people that think they didn't sleep well will get a negative performance hit. And so there's some interesting consequences of this technology as well for how we get feedback on these things. So we've got all these different things. I haven't showed all of them. I'm going to show a lot more, but there's this whole stuff about quantified self, personal informatics, and things about collecting this data. And I want to show you, I want to talk a little bit about this. So quantified self is it's not just about the technology or the data. Right, so there's all these ways to collect data. It's actually about reflection. And what I mean by that is we use this data, we can reflect upon the data to better understand our bodies, our activities, and our lives. Sometimes that reflection satisfies a curiosity. Other times it might lead to a change in habits. So we collect this data some people collect it because they're interested in what they do, but one of the real potentials for this data is to have us think about the things we do a little bit more and maybe make a change. So I've been following this, and I've started to chart two things in my life: my caffeine intake and my sugar intake. Turns out I exercise a lot, so I don't put on a lot of weight, but I eat way too much sugar, and it's probably not very good for me. I drink my sugar, Dr. Peppers. But I started to chart it, and then by charting it, I was able to start using it a little, drinking a little bit less Dr. Pepper and eating a little bit less sugar. So these kinds of things, but I didn't know how much I was taking until I started charting it, right? So these new ways of keeping track of activities, in and of themselves, the data doesn't help us, but the data can help us when it helps us reflect upon our behaviors and maybe make some changes. All right, so we've got this interesting stuff with all this measurement, and there's a lot of stuff around health and wellness. But today I'm going to talk a little bit about another application for all of this measurement, and that's in quantified sports or sports informatics. And quantification is becoming increasingly popular around in athletics. We've got the Moneyball stuff. I don't know if anyone saw that movie, but we've got this idea that we can use statistics managers can use statistics in new ways. And every time I run into somebody nowadays and I mention that I'm doing this, I'm like, oh, I've been thinking about that too. The owner of the Storm, coaches that I interact with who are coaching in the Pac-12. So it's a really interesting and sort of exploding area. And it's based on some really interesting technologies. So first I'm going to talk about the technologies, which sort of get at new possibilities, and they're coming from electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, even some biomedical engineering, because there's some interesting different kinds of sensors. But let me point out a few really cool ones. So some of them they have this RFID technology. So we're putting radio transmitters are going into chips that are going into the jerseys of different athletes, so they can be tracked on what position they're at in the field. So that has applications for, I don't know if you've been watching some of the new broadcasts, but I will tell you that 15 years ago, we did not get to look at where the first down marker was on the field each time, and we did not have these nice little yellow markers under people when they're running around the field. So we've got these new technologies that allow us to track athletes in different ways, and a lot of that is coming from chips that are being embedded into their jerseys. Another cool thing they're doing biometric devices. This is an example of a heart rate monitor that's embedded into a shirt, but that's going to measure heart rate and some other statistics as an athlete is moving around, which can be really interesting. I went to Seattle Sounders are one of the teams that are really incorporating this data really in fascinating ways, and they had a list of different technologies they're using. So they're using something called the Catapult GPS. I think it's this thing here, which measures velocity, acceleration, change of direction, so how these players are moving around on the field. They've got 2 different devices for measuring heart rate, including Polar, which is something I wear when I work out, and some other ones. And then they're doing a lot of fatigue science where they're measuring sleep, I think, with a band. They're measuring sleep and then comparing sleep with some of their reaction times and some of their other data. So they're trying to put data from these different devices together to make observations about their players. And right now, the main application is they're trying to sense when players are getting fatigued and they might get injured, and they're trying to pull them off or get them to reduce their exertion when their fatigue levels are going higher. And it's actually had some good results so far. They have some good statistics about that. We've also got some interesting things with imaging technology. The NBA is starting to wire all of their arenas with cameras in multiple places so they can track, and in combination with some computer vision technology, they can track not just position but activity, different activities of players, and they can make things like these heat maps of player shots, which I'm going to show you again in a little bit. So we have all these new data streams. We've got the biometric devices. We can measure heart rate, breathing rate, acceleration, change of direction, steps, calories, sleep, other things as well. We've got the RFID and GPS technologies, so we can see where people are. GPS is not very precise, but these RFID technologies are pretty precise. They can really see where people are and track their very small movements on a court. And we've got imaging technologies that can show us position and then activity like shot attempts. So what this actually does is produce a ton of data. And that's where the computer science stuff starts to come in. And so all of these things are collecting data. They're collecting data. You can get millions of data points from somebody wearing a biometric device in one practice, depending on how often you take you take a capture of what their heart rate is. And the data is not necessarily useful until we can put it together in some way, right? So there's this whole new area of big data analytics that's happening in a lot of different disciplines. It's happening in the social media stuff I look at in my other work, but it's happening in sports as well. They have whole conferences about this. And there are a lot of folks that seem to have an intersection between sports and Microsoft around these places, around this place, and they're all very interested in big data analytics. So taking sort of computer science skill and applying it to these numbers to make sense of it. So let me give you a sense of some of what goes on. So here's, if you used a Fitbit, which only 2 of you do, but if your parent uses a Fitbit, you can actually, I actually gave my parents Fitbits because they're a little bit older and I was worried they weren't getting enough exercise. And if you connect your Fitbits, you can actually see what they're doing. So I use it as a remote surveillance device on my parents to make sure they're moving around. But you probably don't need to do that yet with your parents. But if you can take their data and you can download it, and it comes out in like something like this, and this is actually pretty small data. This is actually not even classified as big data. It comes out like something like this, and so can anybody tell me what you might see here in this image? Yeah. The date. The date. So you can see the date. So you can see the date. So you can see there's a couple different things. Unfortunately, I didn't get the labels of the thing. So you've got a different, but it's important. Like if you have a data set, there are different fields in that data set, and the different fields are important. And sometimes, like in this case, they're not labeled. So it is important to try to figure out what you're looking at. But there's not a lot of insight you can necessarily. I can see which month they're working out in. There's not a lot of insight that I can get, and I might be able to notice, this person really ran pretty fast or far on this one day, or walked pretty far on this one day, excuse me.
But it doesn't necessarily make sense. So what's interesting is when we start representing this data in different ways. And I think this is a graph of just the number of steps per day. It's actually a different person, but about the same time. And I wonder if there's anything we can see here. Can anybody see? So these are steps per day on somebody. And so think about some insights that we might be able to have. Yeah. Maybe certain days of the week they don't walk as much, and that would actually, there might be a different kind of representation that could help us see that, right? So we actually could do one that just shows aggregate how many steps they walk each day of the week, and that might actually be able to get at it. But you can kind of see some patterns like this even in this one. That's a good observation. Other ones. So one of the observations I had was on this first day. One of these first days they had the Fitbit or that they were measuring. They walked a lot of steps, and they never quite get back there until later. Another thing is it starts to kind of go up there. It seems to go up a little bit on that other end. What do you think happened? Right there.
The weather got better.
Yeah, the weather got better. So you can kind of absolutely the weather might have gotten better, and and so this is probably Seattle because it's still pretty bad in May, but it gets better there in the later summer, right? So there's these insights we can have from the data, and I'm sure if we looked a little bit further, we could find some other ones. All right, so this is a very far away. This is biometric data from one of the Husky athletic teams. I'm not showing you the numbers precisely because we have to do some privacy stuff with them. And there's some color happened here because there's a researcher who let me borrow these data. He's been trying to look at new ways of visualizing this data. So this is more big data. So you can imagine they've got 30 different measures, and they probably have them. This probably goes for a long way down. This is probably just a tiny little snapshot, and they probably have 1 million data points in their data set. So, the team gave this to a team of researchers and said, we want to make sense of this data. What can we do? And the researchers tried to come up with ways of making sense of the data. And one of the things they developed was so they had the heart rate monitor, and they had this. They went for about a week. They took a week of data, so they've anonymized the names, so you don't know which player, and I'm not going to tell you which team. But you can see how hard they're working. So in the dark green, they worked really hard during that practice, and then the light green, they worked medium. They were working pretty medium hard, and the really light green, they're not maybe working that hard. And so, anybody have any? Can anybody think about some insights we might have from this one? Yeah. Right. So. Right, so that actually might even be a Saturday, but yeah, right, so the practices on Wednesdays are pretty intense, and the practices on Saturdays are not so intense. Yeah. And any other ones? So a coach might be able to see who's working really hard. Porky is not living up to his name. He's actually working pretty hard in there. He's doing some really great stuff. And then Daffy might not be working hard as some other players, and so the coaches are able to look at this, and the coaches were trying to make sense of this, and that was really hard. And they were using colors to focus on pieces that might help them. And you can see how something like this the way the image is represented can help them make some observations. So visualizations can help us make sense of data. And there's some really interesting things about finding new ways to visualize information. And this is both an engineering question, a computer science question, and a design question. Because these visualizations can help us understand what's going on. But how we design those visualizations determines it shapes what kinds of insights we can have. So I'm going to do a few more of these things. So shooting statistics for basketball. They do these things called heat maps that show images of where people are shooting. So the coloration, where people are shooting and how many points they get there. So it's a little bit about how often they score from that area. And you can see some interesting things here. So anyone want to give some observations? So this is a basketball court, and the darker, the more red colors mean they score more points from that area, and the bluish tones mean they score fewer points. Yeah, in the back of the red shirt. Yeah, so the inside, like the layup area, is a really interesting place. And then they score a lot on the threes. You have from the baseline three. Does anybody know why? Yeah. Yeah, it's the shortest distance, right? Because the three-point line couldn't actually be extended because of the width of the court. So it's actually the shortest distance. So, and then I noticed something yesterday. It might not be as visible here. Yeah, I can't see it anymore. Anyway, so there's some interesting things there. This actually even gets more interesting when you start looking at specific teams. So you're looking at specific teams or specific players. So this is 2012, I think, and this is LeBron James against, and they were in the playoff series against Kevin Durant. What does this show? And how might this help a do? Yeah.
It shows the styles of the players, obviously, where they're more comfortable shooting and points.
Yeah, so where they're most comfortable to shoot. So it shows where certain players are most comfortable shooting and where they're going to be more dangerous than other players. So if I'm guarding Kevin Durant, where should I be very careful and not let him shoot? The top three, yeah. Like, you as a basketball player, you can be aware of people. You're playing defense everywhere, but if you know I really have to stop that player in that one area, then it's going to be a little, it's at least something you can concentrate on and something you might be able to stop. Although I knew that Cheryl Swoops was always going to go left and do a one-over cross-up and shoot, and I knew it, and she just would do it to me over and over again anyways and still score. But and I imagine Kevin Durant is a lot like that. But at least you have an area to concentrate on. And where would I want to let LeBron James shoot? I want to encourage him to shoot there. If he has the ball over on that side, but short of the three-point line, I might let him shoot. He takes a lot of shots out there, so the width of the image is how many shots, and the color is how many points they score there. I might let him shoot a couple steps in from the three-point line on the outside there, on the wing. Anyway, so these visualizations can be used to scout a player, and they also can be used by a player to see, you know what, I need to work on my shot in this area because I'm not doing so well in that area, or I really need to improve my game because I've got a whole half of the court that I'm not using, or a whole area of the court that I'm not using well. So visualizations, as I said, they shape what we see in the data, and the way the visualization is the way it functions helps us make different insights about another player, about ourselves, and other kinds of data as well. We've got similar player statistics for soccer. I'm not going to show you this one. I'm going to move on. But there's one that I thought was really interesting. So it's passing statistics for soccer, and they showed this. I'm going to give you a couple seconds to look at this and make some observation. And so these were, so they're trying to see what percentage of completion a player makes when they make certain kinds of passes in different directions. And I think the blue is the completed pass and the red is an incompleted pass. And so what does this kind of suggest over here, the image on your right? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so it's a lot easier to make passes in soccer going backwards, right? And you can see, and they can also get a sense of which side a player, he's actually doing, he or she, I think it's a men's team, is actually doing a little bit better going off to the left side. So maybe there's somebody that they have a good connection with on their team on the left side, or maybe that's a function of the defense or something else. But you can see these certain kinds of patterns. We also have, okay, so I'm going to look at some of the biometric data here. So the player exertion for the Sounders. So they get a readout like this of sort of what kind of how much exertion, and they made a measure out of it. And who knows how they make that measure? Although how they make that measure is really important. But how might a coach use something like this? This is actually an interesting one because the player in yellow is actually on the sideline. They're not playing that day, and so they're actually able to see that they're at a level of exertion that's almost the same. They're probably on an exercise bike or something, and they're almost at the same level as the team. So that's one way. They're trying to make sure that the players that aren't involved because of injury are able to keep up. But they can also make judgments about players that are really exerting themselves pretty hard, so I know they're working hard. Maybe it's going to be a game day pretty soon, or maybe it's late in the season. I actually don't want them working that hard, so I can take them out of drills or something. Or maybe there's players down here that are like, I think you need to work a little harder. But maybe player 19 is a goalie. I don't know. Maybe they're not able to move as much. Anyway, so they've got they can make some observations about how players are performing. And I'm going to get to how it's not all good because I think it's kind of creepy sometimes. But that's another thing. So we've got different kinds of applications. We've got applications for the fans. So I think these new technologies are enabling really cool stuff. So for the fans, we've got stuff when you're watching games now. We've got some really interesting commentary that can happen. The analysts and the commentators can take this data and give us more insight into the game. I've learned a lot about football in the last 2 years because they can draw my attention to certain players, and I can learn about more of the off-the-ball activity that's going on in football that I wasn't able to track before because I didn't know what to look at. So this can really help you understand the game. They can answer certain kinds of questions, right? So when we think about the data, I'm going to start showing you what kinds of questions can that data or that visualization help us answer. So the commentators can use this data to figure out which matchups are going to be most interesting, or how a certain player's position affected a specific play. For the coaches, we've got some really interesting questions, and I've talked a little bit about it. But how do we defend an opposing player? So those heat maps can help us figure out, how are we going to defend that player? We can also look at different data and see what combinations of different players on my team do best together. And maybe two players have some really good statistics, but when they're in together, they actually don't play that well. So I actually want to play them at different times. We've got data like this for coaches and trainers. We can see who's working the hardest, who might need to work harder, who might need to work maybe not so hard as we want to taper or bring out or highlight our strengths. Who's working the hardest, who's not working hard. At what point in exertion does a player's performance drop off? So if I combine biometric data, my heart rate data, with my shot attempts, what if we start to see, at a certain point when my heart rate gets this high, my shooting percentage goes down. So if we can lay these different data feeds on top of each other, we can make some really interesting insights about ourselves, and coaches can make them about players and know the best time to pull a player out and sub someone in for them. We can also look at how does our travel schedule disrupt our sleep, and does that affect our performance? And I would love for coaches who have done this with the early morning practices. They might find out that an early morning practice actually lowers the performance and isn't worth it because it's affecting sleep in different ways. And I'm sure there's a lot of other questions. I think I'm going to save those so we'll have a little time for questions for me. And then there's general managers and owners. I've run into a few they're really excited about a lot of this. They can answer questions like, should we change our roster? Should we change our coach? Which players should we recruit or sign? So there's these kinds of questions that they can use. But for me and for my team, we're actually most interested in this. I'm really interested in how does this data affect the athletes and how we can use it. So if you recall, I'm from human-centered design, and we really have this focus on the human-centeredness. For this question in this area, I'm really interested in athlete-centered design. I'm really interested in how we can use this technology to help athletes become better athletes and understand their game better, turn their weaknesses into strengths and things. And as Andy mentioned, I'm a little biased towards this because I was an athlete and I never was a coach. And so I have this different perspective where if we're going to have all this new data, I would like it to be empowering the athletes themselves and not just sort of used for surveillance by the coaches to watch athletes in new ways. So, so the question that we're looking at right now is how do we design better feedback from these devices to help athletes improve, to help us make, to help us understand, our injury and fatigue situations. I would like feedback that shows me where my weaknesses are, in a way that also points me a way forward to turning those weaknesses into strengths, right? And so we're really focused. Working with actually one former UW soccer player and then another student who was a soccer player as well, and we're really thinking about this as a possible new area for research. And saying all that, I'm going to spin this now to talk about the Paul Allen Computing Challenge, the data science in action. So we're actually going to do this data science challenge. It's launching today, but it's a team project that goes over time, and there's two different sections of it. And we've shaped the contest this year around sports data. And initially, we're going to use data from two Husky sports teams, two teams that we've been using for our own research a little bit. We have women's volleyball and men's soccer data for some self-reported measures. And we're going to ask teams of students to do calculations and visualizations using this data to ask questions. So we're going to give you the questions to start, and you can use Excel or software applications, or hopefully many of you will actually do some computer programming yourselves to solve it. And then in the second part of the challenge, we're going to turn it around and give you access to biometric data about yourselves, and then let you ask your own questions. And so we're going to make sort of a research type contest where you get to work with a UW student mentor to design a research study that analyzes biometric data. And you'll end up creating and presenting a poster at the end. All right, so we're really excited about that. We had a lot of fun with this last year in a different area, but I'm really excited to see what you all come up with this, and hopefully some of you are excited and will want to participate in this challenge. All right, thank you. And now we're at questions.
Thank you, Kate. So we can take questions, certainly from folks in the audience here in Seattle, but those of you in Redmond, we have a system set up so, or if you're shy in the audience here and you don't want to raise your hand, you can text your question and we'll get it and feed it to Kate here. So there's information about how to do that on the screen here. You just text to a 5-digit number, 37607, and just prefix your question with that 6-digit number, and we'll get it here. In the meantime, if anybody has questions in the audience for Kate, we can take them.
Questions? Yeah.
How did you create your heat map?
Yeah, so I did not create that. I stole
Just
it.
repeat it for them.
No, they have some technology around that. That actually, I got it from, the image came from the New York Times, but there are technologies online to, there's probably code online to help you make those. The trick, getting the data for the heat map, I believe, comes from video imaging technology. But in terms of actually taking that data and making it into the heat map, they're probably, usually, I don't know, how many of you code? How many of you, when you don't know how to do something, you go online and you find someone who's done it before and you plug that into your code, right? I wasn't able to do that when I was your age because we didn't have online, but I imagine there are libraries out there for that, but I don't know where they are. But I imagine there are libraries out there that can help you make heat maps.
So here's a question from the audience. How do you see NBA general managers using this data in the future and making draft choices? Do they have a program that stores all this data?
So I can't speak for NBA quite, but I can speak for WNBA. And I was hanging out with the owner of the Storm, one of the owners of the Storm last night. They're very interested in this data. They're putting together a team of analysts to start looking at things. And I also know that some other she was a Microsoft person. I also know that Steve Ballmer is interested in putting a sports analytics team together for his new team, which are the Clippers, I believe. And I see them doing it. What I know is that they have the data, They have a lot of data. They've got some statistics. They're doing some analysis, but there's a lot of room for new types of analyses. They don't really know what they're doing with it yet. So they're putting together teams, and they're thinking about, and they have some measures that they're making and some visualizations they're doing. But there's actually a lot of room for creating new kinds of visualizations and new ways of analyzing this data. And I think they're very excited about it because there's a lot of creative, academic, data sciencey, nerdy questions there that are really fun to think about. And it's a really exciting research frontier, actually.
So here's two related questions. One is, how do we deal with the privacy concerns of having all this data available, especially for an average person? And then related to that is, are the players' personal biometric data available to players and coaches on other teams?
Right, so those are very interesting questions on the privacy. So in the work that we're doing, we're trying as much as we can to anonymize all the data, which can be really hard when it's a player over time and you can see certain kinds of things. So we're going to do a lot of scraping and cleaning in our data set, so you can't see which player is which, because there are huge privacy issues around. I don't know if you know this, for any kind of data, medical data, even your Fitbit data. There are things that you might not want other people to know about you, that these devices can measure, whether it's an underlying health problem or whether it's habits that you have that maybe you're working on but you don't want the world to know about them. And so these devices that measure things bring up huge privacy issues, and there's a lot of conversations that we all have to have about them. And actually in our research that we've done so far, when we're looking at how teams are using this, that's one of our first big questions. Are like, is this kind of feels like surveillance of the athletes? And I'm not really 100% sure that that's a great thing. It will have unintended consequences, and it's something we should definitely think about. I had another piece of that's drifting away. Hopefully I'll think of it again. But anyways, really great questions, and I think these are questions for society to solve. These are questions for, even as you're doing these the challenge. If you choose to do it and you're looking at this data, something for you to really think about is what kind of concerns you would have if people had data like this about you.
Okay, we want to keep you on track for the programming for today. I just want to mention that there are flyers that you in Seattle will get back at your tables about the contest, and probably the folks in Redmond have as well. Last for Kate is, how do you balance being a computer science wizard, a basketball goddess, and your personal life? That seems like a lot.
Well, the truth is you can only do one or two at once. So when I was in college, I had no personal life. And then when I played basketball professionally, I really didn't have an academic life. And now I have a personal life and an academic life, and I don't play very much basketball. But it's really hard to do all three. And as a young person, I just really threw myself both into my academics and my basketball, and the personal life eventually worked itself out. So I'm quite happy with it. But I was pretty, not singularly focused, but I was pretty focused as a young person, which I know a lot of you are. Just to see you here today, I can see that you're working hard.
Thank you.
One more question?
Yeah, one more.
So I remember you talking about how the sleep data on negative effects. I was wondering if all this data can actually cause anxiety, just knowing, aware of every single thing that's put on your body, how you're washing, how you're eating. Probably a lot of stress.
This is a fantastic question. It's one of the ones we think will be one of our first research studies. He's asking a question about. He brought up the sleep study I talked about, where the knowing about your sleep could actually have negative consequences, and he was talking about how knowing too much, how some of these measurements, whether it's for athletes or just regular people, knowing too much and thinking about some of these things can actually have negative consequences. And I think that's true for athletes, and I think that's also true for people that there may be certain kinds of feedback that we don't really need to have about ourselves, and it may make us too focused on things like counting calories. I'm actually not a proponent of counting calories very often. I told you I'm trying to lower my sugar, but it has to do with, because sugar has a very clear health problem that it can cause for me and my family. But some of these measurement things can actually have a negative effect, and so these are important questions for us as a society, for us as individuals, and it's for us as researchers to be thinking about. And that's something I hope you're thinking about, and I definitely am as a researcher. Fantastic question. Thank you.
Let's thank Kate and send you guys off to do some programs. Okay, I think Seattle folks, you go back to the place where you registered and have fun today.
Thank you. I just had to do all the work.
Great job. We have a former Garfield team at the Sounders.
Oh, really? Oh, that's
Yeah.
awesome. That's
So I have to
awesome.
see if they made it. Sounders.
Everyone's a huge Sounders fan. But they're actually doing some of the coolest stuff with the data.
Yeah.
Oh, that's what I was going to say. But the NBA, the Players Association, won't let them put any devices on them,
One,
which is a really good.
I can't think. I think it was